After a highway accident left me with 3 broken ribs, my wife came to see me at the hospital every day. At 11:47 p.m., a police officer walked into my room. He covered my mouth and whispered, "Don't make a sound. You need to know something." I froze. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now let's dive into today's story. K. He had simply started, in his 40th year, to have opinions about his own money. It began after his father died. Something about burying the man who had taught him to hold a wrench had made Harrison think about the end of things, about what happened to what a person built. He started reading his own paperwork more carefully. He started noticing which accounts had which names on them, and Rebecca noticed him noticing. She never said a word about it. She just started watching him differently. Harrison could feel it sometimes at dinner, a weight on the side of his face, and when he looked up she would be smiling at him with her fork halfway to her mouth. "What?" he would say. "Nothing," she would say. "You just look far away." He would laugh and go back to his plate. He thought about that later, in a hospital bed, with 3 broken ribs and a machine counting his heartbeats. He thought about how many times she had looked at him like that. How many dinners. How many quiet evenings on the porch when he had assumed the silence between them was comfort. It was not comfort. She had been doing arithmetic. Harrison worked as a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing plant 15 miles outside Bellwood. It was not glamorous work. He spent his days in a building that smelled of hot metal and cutting oil, walking concrete floors, listening to machines the way a doctor listens to a chest. He could tell when a bearing was going bad from 30 feet away. He had been there 19 years. The men under him called him Vale and meant it as respect. He was not a wealthy man, but he was a careful one. He had started saving at 22 because his father had told him to, and he had never stopped, even in the years when it meant driving a truck with a hole in the floorboard. He owned the house outright. He had a retirement account he had never once borrowed against. He had 2 modest investment accounts and a savings account with more in it than most people would have guessed by looking at his boots. Then his father died, and Harrison inherited more. Not a fortune, but real money. The kind of money that changes what a family can do. Rebecca knew exactly how much there was. She knew because he had told her, sitting on the edge of the bed the night the estate closed, holding a folder against his knees and feeling strange about the whole thing. "That's a lot," she had said. "It's Dad's whole life," Harrison had said. "That's what it comes down to. A number on a page." She had put her hand on his back and rubbed a slow circle. "He'd want you to have it." She knew which accounts held what. She knew the appraised value of the house, because she had been the one who called the appraiser. And she knew, down to the dollar, the amount of his life insurance policy, because she had sat beside him at the kitchen table 2 years earlier while he filled out the renewal. Lately, she had begun asking questions. They were small questions, dropped into ordinary conversation the way you drop a stone in a pond to see how deep it is. One evening in September, she was rinsing dishes, and she said, over the running water, "What happens to the house if something happens to you?" Harrison laughed. He was at the table with a beer, half watching a ball game on his phone. "Why are you asking?" "I'm your wife." She shut off the tap and dried her hands. "I'm supposed to know these things. Nothing's happening to me." "That's not an answer. You're not getting rid of me that easy." Rebecca smiled at him over her shoulder. It was a good smile, warm at the edges, exactly the right size. "I hope not," she said. He remembered that smile later, too. Behind it, she was furious, because Harrison had told her, 2 weeks before, that he intended to update several documents. Nothing dramatic. He had a lawyer in Bellwood, a man named Ott who had done his father's estate, and Harrison had made an appointment. He wanted his younger sister, Mara Mercer, to receive part of the inheritance. He had explained it to Rebecca carefully, because he knew how it might sound. Mara was 34 and worked 2 jobs and had a son with a heart condition that ate money the way a fire eats paper. Their father had left everything to Harrison because Harrison was older and because their father had been an old-fashioned man about such things. Harrison thought that was wrong. He had thought it was wrong at the funeral. He had thought about it every day since. "It's Dad's money," he told Rebecca. "It should go where Dad would have wanted it, not where the paperwork put it." Rebecca had been folding laundry. She did not stop folding. "Of course," she said. "She's your sister." You're not upset? Why would I be upset? She smoothed a towel flat, then folded it in thirds. It's your family. That was the sentence. Harrison did not catch it at the time. It's your family. Not our money. Not our decision. Your family, out there, separate, taking something. She did not like it. Not at all. She wanted everything. The house, which she had spent 11 years turning into something people complimented. The savings. The investments. The retirement account. The insurance money, which was the largest single number in their entire life, and which existed only if Harrison stopped existing. She wanted all of it, not because she was greedy in any simple way. Harrison would understand that later, sitting in a courtroom, listening to a prosecutor lay it out. Rebecca did not want money the way a poor person wants money. She wanted it the way a builder wants materials. She had a plan for the rest of her life, and Harrison's assets were the foundation of it. And Harrison himself had become a wall standing in the wrong place. And there was another man waiting for her. His name was Trevor Kane. He was 38, worked construction when he worked at all, and had been secretly involved with Rebecca for nearly 2 years. They had met at a supply yard where she had gone to price fence posts. She had come home that evening and made pot roast and asked Harrison about his day. Harrison knew nothing about him. Not his name. Not his face. Not the fact that he existed. He would learn all three from a police detective in the middle of the night, in a hospital bed, with his mouth covered. The accident happened on a Thursday night in October. It had rained since noon. Not hard, just steady, the kind of rain that never quite becomes a storm and never quite stops. By 8 o'clock, the highway outside Bellwood had that black shine to it, the surface holding a thin film of water and old oil, and every set of headlights smeared across it like paint. Harrison had worked late. A conveyor motor had failed on the second shift, and he had stayed to see it replaced, because he did not like leaving a job half-finished for the night crew to inherit. He came out to the lot at 9:40 with grease on the back of his hand and the smell of the plant still in his jacket. He called Rebecca from the cab of his truck before he pulled out. "I'm just leaving," he said. "Long one." Motor went down. "You eat anything?" "Vending machine." She made a small, disapproving sound. He liked that sound. 11 years of that sound. "There's chili on the stove," she said. "Drive safe." "It's wet out." "I will." Harrison. "Yeah." A pause. Maybe 2 seconds. He replayed those 2 seconds 1,000 times afterward and never decided what was in them. "Nothing," she said. "Just come home." He drove out onto the highway with the wipers going and the heater blowing warm air across his knuckles. 19 miles of Tulane between the plant and Bellwood, most of it empty at that hour. The road cutting through cut hay fields and stands of pine. He was thinking about the weekend. That was the part that stayed with him. Not the impact. Not the sound. The fact that in the last ordinary minute of his old life, he had been thinking about taking his wife to dinner. There was a place in Clayton with good steaks and a decent wine list, and it was her kind of place, and he had been running through the days in his head trying to decide between Friday and Saturday. He had no idea that she had already made other plans for him. The headlights came up behind him near mile marker 41. They were high off the road. A pickup, riding tall, maybe a 3/4 ton. It closed the gap fast on the straightaway, and then it sat there, for car lengths back, matching his speed. Harrison noticed it the way you notice weather. Briefly, without meaning. He tapped the brake once to signal that he was there. The truck did not fall back. The road bent left through a cut in the trees, and on the far side of the bend the shoulder narrowed and the guardrail began, a long ribbon of steel running down the right side toward the bridge over Rowdy Creek. The pickup pulled out to pass. Harrison eased right to give it room. Ordinary courtesy. Something he had done 10,000 times. The truck came alongside. Harrison glanced over. He saw a dark cab, rain sheeting off the roofline, a shape behind the wheel with no features to it. The window was up. The driver did not look at him. Then the truck moved toward his lane. It was not a drift. Harrison had spent his whole life around machines, and he knew the difference between a thing going wrong and a thing being aimed. The pickup came over hard and deliberate, all at once, and there was no room and no time. Harrison cut the wheel right. His tires found water. The impact caught him at the rear quarter panel, just behind the wheel well, and the back end of his truck let go like a door swinging open. The world spun. He remembered the guardrail arriving. That was all. a silver line coming up out of the dark, and then the sound, which was not one sound but many at once, metal folding and glass breaking, and something in his own chest making a noise he felt more than heard. The airbag hit him in the face. His chest came forward into the belt, and the wheel, and something gave with a sound like a green branch snapping. Glass came across the seat in a wave. The truck came to rest at an angle against the rail with the engine still running and the wipers still going, sweeping back and forth across a cracked windshield. Harrison was conscious for about 9 seconds after that. He remembered rain coming through the broken window onto his cheek. Cold, very cold, and the smell of hot coolant, and somewhere far off the sound of an engine accelerating away down the highway. Then everything went black. The pickup did not stop. It did not slow. Its taillights crossed the bridge over Rowdy Creek and were gone. A woman driving home from a night shift found him 11 minutes later. She said afterward that she thought at first the truck had been abandoned because it was sitting so still, and it was only when she saw the wipers moving that she understood there was someone in it. Emergency crews arrived at 10:22. They cut the door away with a spreader and brought him out on a board. He came half awake once during the extraction and asked, very clearly, whether the second shift had gotten the motor in. The paramedic told him yes. Harrison said good and went under again. He survived. 3 broken ribs, a fractured left wrist, a serious concussion with bleeding they watched closely for 2 days, deep bruising across his chest in the exact shape of the seatbelt, which stayed on him for a month like a mark somebody had painted there. The driver who hit him was gone. State troopers worked the scene in the rain until 3 in the morning. They photographed the paint transfer on his rear quarter panel and the gouges in the guardrail and the tire marks that were mostly washed out by then. And Rebecca, when the hospital called her at 11:05 that night, made a sound on the phone that the charge nurse would later describe, on a witness stand, under oath, as the worst sound she had ever heard a human being make. She was very, very good. Rebecca came to the hospital every day. She came in the morning before the doctors made rounds, and she came again in the evening, and on the weekend she came at noon and stayed until they told her visiting hours were over. She brought Harrison his coffee from the place on Delaney Street, the one that made it the way he liked it, because the hospital coffee tasted like warm pennies. She adjusted his pillows. She read him the mail. She held a cup of water with a straw in it up to his mouth when his wrist was in the brace, and he could not manage it himself. And she did not rush him, and she did not sigh. She spoke gently to the nurses. She learned their names in 2 days. She asked about their shifts and their children and remembered the answers. And whenever anyone mentioned the accident, she cried. Not loudly. Rebecca never did anything loudly. Her eyes would fill, and she would look at the floor and press 2 fingertips under one eye, and then she would apologize for it, which made it worse for everyone watching. To the entire 4th floor, she looked like a woman who had almost lost her whole life. One of the night nurses stopped her in the hallway on the 5th evening. You're such a loving wife, she said. I've been doing this 22 years. I know the difference. Rebecca lowered her head. I almost lost him, she said. The nurse touched her arm and went on down the hall. Harrison, from his bed, saw the whole thing through the gap in the door. He remembered thinking, dully, through the fog of the concussion and the painkillers, that he did not deserve her. But there was something else happening in that room, and Harrison had been noticing it for days without being able to make it mean anything. Whenever he closed his eyes, Rebecca's face changed. He caught it the first time by accident. He had been dozing and had opened his eyes a fraction, not enough to move his lids much, and she was sitting in the chair by the window with her phone dark in her lap, looking at him. The softness was gone. It was not hatred. That was what unsettled him most. Later, when he could think again, hatred would have made sense. What he saw was flat and cool and evaluating, the expression of a woman looking at a machine that had failed to do what the manual said it would do. Her jaw was tight. Her mouth was a straight line. Then she saw his eyes move, and the whole face reassembled itself in less than a second, and she said, "Hey, you're awake," in a voice like a hand on your forehead. He told himself it was the medication. He told himself grief looked strange from the outside. He was too weak to understand what it meant. But some part of him, somewhere below the drugs, filed it away. On the 7th night, he woke suddenly. He did not know why. There had been no sound. The room was dim. lit only by the blue glow of the monitor and the thin line of light under the door. His mouth was dry. His ribs ached in a slow, deep way that pulsed with his heartbeat. He turned his head and looked at the clock beside the bed. 11:47 p.m. The hallway outside was almost silent. Somewhere far down the corridor, a cart rolled over a threshold. Then nothing. The door opened. A man stepped inside and shut it behind him without letting it click. He was a police officer, or had been one long enough that it had shaped him. 51, maybe. Broad through the shoulders, going soft at the middle, with a face that looked like it had been awake for a week. His coat was damp. He carried a small folder under his arm. Harrison started to speak. The man crossed the room in 4 steps, faster than Harrison expected, and put his hand flat over Harrison's mouth. "Mr. Vale," he said quietly, "I need you to stay quiet." Harrison's eyes went wide. His heart rate jumped, and the monitor caught it, the beeps quickening, and the man glanced at the screen and then back down. "I'm Detective Nolan Pierce, Bellwood Police." He tilted his head toward the door. "I'm going to take my hand away. Don't make a sound. Not one. Do you understand me?" Harrison stared at him. Then he nodded. Once. Nolan removed his hand. Harrison licked his lips. His throat was sandpaper. "What? Quiet." Nolan pulled the chair over, Rebecca's chair, still angled toward the bed, and sat down close enough that Harrison could smell rain on his coat and coffee on his breath. He leaned in. "You need to know something," Nolan said. "And I'm telling you here at this hour because this is the only place and the only time I can be sure of who's listening." Harrison's hands had gone cold. The crash wasn't an accident. For a second, nothing in Harrison worked. Not his lungs, not his thoughts. The words sat in the room like an object. His heart began pounding. He felt it in his broken ribs, each beat a separate small injury. "Say that again," he whispered. "It wasn't an accident." Nolan opened the folder on his knee, but did not hand it over. "The paint transfer on your rear quarter is consistent with a deliberate contact at speed. There's no braking. Not on your side, we know that, but not on his side either, before or after. A man who drifts into you brakes. A man who panics brakes. Nothing on that road says panic." Harrison struggled to breathe. When he tried to pull air in deep, his ribs stopped him halfway, and the panic and the pain came together and made each other worse. "Slow," Nolan said. "Slow. Breathe shallow. There you go." "Who?" Harrison said. "We don't know yet." Nolan looked toward the door. He listened for 3 full seconds before he turned back. "But we found the truck that hit you," Harrison whispered. "Where?" "Abandoned. 2 counties over, off a service road behind a closed grain elevator. Wiped down inside. Plate's gone." Nolan paused, and something in the pause made Harrison brace himself. "Front left corner has your paint on it. There's no question it's the vehicle. Then you know who owns it. We will buy tomorrow." Nolan's voice dropped further. "There's something else. We pulled your phone records and your work schedule as part of the reconstruction. Standard. Mr. Vale, that motor going down on second shift, that was unplanned. You should have been home by 7. You weren't on that road at that hour on any pattern anybody could have predicted from the outside." Harrison stared at him. So whoever was driving that truck knew exactly when you'd be on that highway. Not roughly. Exactly. He was parked on the shoulder at the county line for 40 minutes, and he pulled out 90 seconds before you passed. "How?" Harrison's voice cracked. "How could anybody that," Nolan said, "is what we're trying to determine." The monitor kept counting. Out in the hall, a door closed somewhere. Then Nolan said the thing that turned Harrison's stomach over. He said it plainly. No warning, no cushion. He looked Harrison in the face and said, "And I don't think you should trust the person who has been sitting beside your bed every day." Harrison did not answer. He could not. His mouth had stopped working. Somewhere in his chest, under the broken bones, a piece of him that had been standing upright for 11 years quietly sat down. He thought about a coffee cup from Delaney Street. He thought about a phone call from the plant parking lot in the rain. "Harrison." "Yeah." "Nothing. Just come home. Say something," Nolan said. Harrison looked at the ceiling. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady in a way that surprised them both. "What do you need me to do?" Nolan sat back. Something in his face shifted. surprise, and then a kind of grim approval. Nothing, he said. That's exactly it. Nothing. You wake up tomorrow, and you're the same man you were yesterday. You drink the coffee. You say thank you. You don't ask her a single question you weren't already going to ask. For how long? Until I tell you. Nolan closed the folder. Mr. Vale, listen to me. Right now, whoever did this thinks it failed and thinks nobody's looking. That's the only advantage we have. The day they find out different is the day the evidence starts disappearing. Harrison closed his eyes. She's bringing me breakfast at 8, he said. Then eat it, said Nolan. Harrison did not confront Rebecca. That was the first decision that saved him, and it was the hardest thing he had ever done. He lay awake the rest of that night. The painkillers had worn thin around 2, and he let them stay thin because he wanted his head clear, and pain was the price of a clear head. He watched the ceiling tiles go from gray to blue to a washed-out white as the window filled with morning. He rehearsed. Not words. Words were easy. He rehearsed the smaller things, the angle of his shoulders when she came in, how long he would hold her hand, where his eyes would go when she said the word accident. He had spent 19 years diagnosing machines by their behavior. Now, he had to be one. At 8:10 the door opened, and Rebecca came in with the coffee. Morning, Harrison said, and smiled. She crossed the room and kissed his forehead. Her lips were cool. She smelled like the shampoo they had used for years, the one in the green bottle in their shower, and for one horrible second his whole body wanted to grab her wrist and ask her. He did not. How are you feeling? She said. Better. Really better? Or you better? Really? He shifted, winced honestly, and let her see the wince, because a man who hides nothing looks like a man with nothing to hide. They said maybe home by the end of next week. That's so soon. She set the coffee on the tray and pried the lid off for him. Her hands were steady. Don't rush it. I'm not rushing anything. She smiled. I'm so relieved. Harrison looked at her. So am I, he said. And that was all. She sat down in the chair. She read him a letter from the insurance company about the truck. She complained about a woman on the school committee. She laughed at something, and Harrison laughed too, at the right moment, at the right volume. He did not tell her about Nolan. He did not tell her the pickup had been found, or where, or that there was a strip of his own truck's paint on its front corner, sitting in a state lab under a case number. He did not tell her that a detective had covered his mouth in the dark and told him not to trust her. Instead, over the following days, Harrison cooperated quietly. Nolan came at odd hours, always late, always with the door shut. Twice he came dressed as maintenance, pushing a cart, because a hospital is a place where nobody looks twice at a man in coveralls. Harrison gave him what he had. He gave him 11 years. He gave him account numbers and the name of his lawyer and the date of his appointment with Ott. He gave him the exact figure on the insurance policy, and Nolan wrote it down and looked at it for a long moment without saying anything. Police identified the pickup's owner on the 4th day. Trevor Kane. Nolan told him in the hallway of the physical therapy wing, standing beside a rack of resistance bands while Harrison sat in a wheelchair with a towel over his knees. Name mean anything to you? Harrison turned it over. Trevor Kane. Trevor Kane. No, he said. Nothing. You're sure? I've lived in this town my whole life. I'd know if I knew him. But Nolan knew the name. Harrison could see it in the set of his mouth. Who is he? 38. Works construction when he's working. 2 convictions, one for a financial fraud scheme out of Knoxville, one for vehicle theft before that. Nolan looked down the hallway. He isn't a professional. That's the good news. Professionals don't leave paint. And the bad news? The bad news is people like Trevor Kane don't wake up one morning and decide to kill a maintenance supervisor they've never met. Nolan crouched down to Harrison's eye level, which was a thing Harrison would remember about him, that he never talked down at a man in a chair. Somebody pointed him at you. Then investigators pulled Trevor's phone records, and the case stopped being a hit and run. There were calls, hundreds of them, going back nearly 2 years. There were text threads. There were 2 payments moving out of accounts that touched, at one remove, an account with Rebecca Vale's name on it. Harrison sat with that for a long time. Nolan had put a single sheet in front of him. A call log. Nothing dramatic. Columns of numbers and times. The most ordinary-looking page in the world. That's her cell, Harrison said. Yes. 2 years. 22 months, by our count. Harrison read the page again. There was a call at 9:44 p.m. on the night of the accident. For minutes after he had phoned her from the plant parking lot to say he was leaving. He put the paper down on the blanket. How long was she on with him, he asked. 51 seconds. Harrison nodded slowly. He did not cry. He had thought he might, when it finally came, and he did not. What he felt instead was something colder and more useful, settling into him joint by joint like a temperature change. 51 seconds, he repeated. That's all it takes to give a man a time and a place. Arrest her? I can't. Nolan took the page back and slid it into the folder. Not on this. A defense attorney takes a call log and an old affair and turns it into a sad story about a lonely woman. I need Kane. Kane in a room, with a lawyer, looking at conspiracy to commit murder. He'll trade her inside an hour. Men like him always do. But before police could bring Trevor Kane in, Trevor Kane vanished. His phone stopped working on a Tuesday. It last connected to a tower 4 miles from the Vale house, and then it never connected again anywhere on Earth. His apartment in Clayton was empty, the closet cleared, a week of mail on the floor inside the door. His mother in Alabama had not heard from him. His half-brother had not heard from him. Nolan interviewed Rebecca at the kitchen table of her own house on a Thursday afternoon, with the recorder running and her hands folded around a mug of tea. He asked if she knew a man named Trevor Kane. Rebecca did not flinch. She did not glance away. She looked mildly puzzled for exactly the right length of time, and then her face cleared. I knew him years ago, she said. She lied without hesitation, in a warm, easy voice, holding steady eye contact with a man who had spent 26 years watching people lie. He did some work on my mother's fence, I think, or a neighbor's. It was a long time ago. She turned the mug a quarter turn on the table. I haven't spoken to him in forever. Nolan watched her. She smiled back at him, open and helpful, and asked if he wanted more tea. Rebecca had expected the crash to solve everything. That was the shape of it in her head, and it was a clean shape. Harrison dies on a wet road on a Thursday night. A hit and run. Tragic, common, unsolvable. The state closes the file in 6 months for lack of a suspect. The insurance company pays. The house passes to her. The savings become hers. The investments become hers. The retirement account rolls over to the surviving spouse. The appointment with the lawyer named Otten never happens. And Mara Mercer gets a card and a casserole, and nothing else. And nobody in Bellwood, Tennessee, ever questions the grieving wife. They bring her food. They sit with her. They say her name gently for 2 years. That was the plan. But Harrison survived. Then police found the truck faster than anyone should have because Trevor had been stupid about the service road behind the grain elevator. Then Trevor started calling her. Then Trevor disappeared, and the police wanted to know why. Her plan was coming apart, and Rebecca began making mistakes. They were small at first. She lost her patience with a nurse over a parking validation. She snapped at their daughter about a jacket left on the stairs and then apologized twice, too much, which was its own kind of tell. And she started asking Harrison questions. He came home on a Saturday, 18 days after the accident. He walked into his own house on a cane, moving like an old man, and stood in the front hall and looked at the stairs he had built the railing for. Rebecca had cleaned the whole place. There were flowers on the table. "Welcome home," she said. She had been so good for so long. But she was tired now, and tired people push. It started that first evening. "What exactly did the police tell you?" she asked. She was at the counter with her back to him, cutting a lemon. Harrison lowered himself into the chair by the window. "Nothing important. They came to the hospital, though. They came once or twice." He set the cane against the wall. "They asked about the road, whether I saw plates. And did you?" "No." The knife went through the lemon. Slice, slice. "Are they still investigating?" "Apparently." "That's not an answer." Harrison looked at her back. "It's the only one I've got, Beck. Nobody tells me anything. I'm the guy who got hit." 2 days later, she tried again, over dinner. "Do they think someone did this intentionally?" Harrison set his fork down. He took his time. He had learned in the hospital that silence was a tool. "Why would you ask that? It's a normal question." "It isn't." He kept his voice mild. "Somebody sideswipes a guy in the rain and runs because he's drunk or he's got warrants. That's what it is. Where do you get intentional? Rebecca smiled immediately. It came up on her face fast, too fast, and Harrison watched it arrive and understood that he had just seen the mechanism working. I'm not worried, she said. I didn't say worried. I just want whoever did this to pay. She reached across and touched his shoulder. Her fingers pressed a little too hard on the bruised muscle, and he did not let himself react. That's all. I want them to pay for what they did to you. They will, Harrison said. He watched her get up and carry her plate to the sink. And for the first time, standing in his own kitchen with 3 broken ribs and his wife rinsing a plate 8 feet away, Harrison understood what he had been looking at for 11 years. Her kindness was not disappearing. It had never been a thing that could disappear because it had never been a thing at all. It was work. It was a job she performed every day for everyone with enormous skill. The birthdays, the casseroles, the elderly at church. And now she was under pressure, and the work had gotten harder, and he could see the effort in it. The half-second delay before the smile, the slight overcorrection in the voice. He had spent his whole career finding faults by listening for the moment a machine stopped running smooth. He was listening to one now. That night he lay in the dark beside her and did not sleep. She slept easily, on her side, one hand tucked under the pillow the way she always had. Her breathing was slow and even. Harrison stared at the ceiling and thought about the guardrail coming up out of the dark. He thought, you called him at 9:44. He thought, you were on the phone with him for 51 seconds while I was driving toward him in the rain. He thought, and then you made chili. He did not wake her. He did not shake her. He did not put his hands anywhere near her. He got up at 5, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with the sky going gray outside, and by the time she came downstairs he had his face on straight. You're up early, she said. Ribs, said Harrison. Harrison learned what happened to Trevor Kane months later, in pieces from prosecutors and phone records and a transcript read aloud in a courtroom. But when he finally put it together in his own head, he could see it the way you see a thing you were standing next to and did not look at. It had happened on a Tuesday in late October, while Harrison was in a hospital bed 19 miles away, learning to sit up without help. Trevor had come to the house. That was his mistake, and it was the kind of mistake Rebecca could not forgive in anyone. He had come in daylight, up the gravel drive, and parked his cousin's car behind the garage where the hedge hid it from the road. Trevor wanted money. He said so before the door was even shut. He wanted to leave the state. He had seen the news out of the county. A truck recovered, a case reopened, and he had done enough time to know what it felt like when a thing started closing. And he wanted her to keep her promise. That was the part that mattered to him more than the money, and it was the part Rebecca had never taken seriously. She had promised him a future. 2 years of it, in text messages and parked cars and motel rooms in Clayton. After. That was the word they used. After. We'll go somewhere warm. After. None of this will matter. Now there was no after, because Harrison Vale was alive and eating applesauce with a plastic spoon, and Trevor Kane was standing in her kitchen with rain on his boots demanding to be told what happened next. Rebecca tried to calm him. She was very good at calming people. She sat him down. She put coffee in front of him. She told him she had money set aside, that she could get him across the line into Georgia within the week, that he needed to be patient for a few more days. Trevor did not want to be patient. The argument moved out of the kitchen and into the back of the property, because the neighbor's boy was cutting grass 2 lots over, and voices carry. It got worse out there. Trevor said he would go to the police himself. He said he would tell them the whole thing, the schedule, the calls, the money, the fact that she had described her husband's truck to him down to the dented tailgate. He said it in the way a man says a thing he does not mean to win an argument. Rebecca understood, standing in her own garden with the wet grass soaking through her shoes, that she could not control him anymore. That was the only crime she had never planned. What happened in the next few minutes became the darkest secret she ever carried, and she carried it well, because she carried everything well. Trevor Kane disappeared that afternoon. His car was moved that night and left 20 miles away at a shuttered rest stop. His phone stopped working. His apartment sat empty in Clayton with mail piling up inside the door. Rebecca told anyone who asked that he had left town. She said it casually, the way you mention weather. She said she had heard it from someone she could not remember who, that he owed money, that people like that never stay anywhere long. But Trevor had not left Bellwood. He had never left the Vale property. Rebecca concealed him behind the house. In the far corner of the garden she had begun renovating that spring. The section she had told Harrison she wanted to turn into a proper bed, with a border and good soil, because the ground back there had always been rough. She had ordered soil and bark mulch back in April. It had been sitting under a tarp since summer. In November she planted flowers over it. Bulbs, mostly, and a small dogwood at the corner. She worked on it for 3 weekends with her hair tied back and dirt on her nails, and when she came inside she washed her hands at the kitchen sink for a long time. Harrison, home from the hospital, watched her from the window with his ribs wrapped and a cup of tea going cold in his hands. "You're out there a lot," he said once. "It's good for me." She peeled off her gloves. "I need something to do with my hands." "You're not overdoing it?" "It's dirt, Harrison. It isn't heavy lifting." He remembered that exchange for the rest of his life. The neighbors complimented the garden. Mrs. Farrell from across the road stopped at the fence in December and said the corner bed was going to be beautiful come spring, and asked what she was putting in. Rebecca leaned on the shovel and smiled. "I'm trying to make the place beautiful again," she said. After everything, Mrs. Farrell said that was the healthiest thing she had heard all year. Nobody suspected anything. Not the neighbors. Not the church. Not the women on the school committee, who told each other that Rebecca Vale was holding up better than anyone had a right to expect. Not Harrison, who slept 40 feet from that corner of the garden every night for 2 months, and who woke on cold mornings and looked out at the frost on the fresh-turned soil and thought, without any feeling at all, that his wife had finally found a hobby. The investigation lasted more than 2 months. It started as a hit-and-run worked by a county detective and 2 state troopers. It did not stay that way. Trevor Kane's financial records crossed state lines. There were transfers routed through an account in Georgia. There was an insurance policy with a face value large enough to draw attention from people whose whole job is drawing attention to that kind of number. There were communications between 2 phones in 2 different states over 22 months. By early December, federal investigators were sitting in on the meetings. Harrison did not fully understand the jurisdictional map, and Nolan did not have the patience to explain it. "It means more people, more subpoenas, and more time," Nolan said. 2 out of 3 are good for us." Harrison became a witness. He gave them everything he had. He drove to the county building twice a week, at first with Mara behind the wheel because he could not turn his head far enough to check a blind spot. He sat in a room with a table and a window that did not open and answered the same questions in 15 different arrangements. He handed over 11 years of financial records, statements, tax returns, the refinance paperwork he had refused to sign, the appraisal on the house with the appraiser's name on the letterhead, which he had never questioned and which turned out to have been ordered 9 months before he knew anything about it. He explained Rebecca's behavior, the questions about the house, the questions about what happens if something happens to you, the withdrawals he had asked about once and never asked about again. He told them about the appointment with Ott, the lawyer, and the date it had been scheduled for. October 29th, the federal agent said, reading from her notes. "That's right. And the collision was October 9th. "Yes." The agent wrote something down and did not look up. Harrison sat back in the plastic chair and let that fact sit in the room. 20 days. Whenever a session ended, Harrison drove home and walked into a house where his wife made him dinner. That was the part nobody could really understand. Mara asked him about it once in the truck, with her hands tied on the wheel. "How do you do it?" she said. "How do you sit across a table from her?" Harrison looked out the window at the pines going by. "Same way you hold a wire you know is live," he said. "You just don't let go early." "Harrison, if I move, she moves. She's smarter than me, Mara. She's smarter than all of us, and she's been doing this since before I knew it was happening." He shifted against the seat belt, careful with his ribs. "The only thing I have is that she thinks I don't know." Mara drove for a mile without speaking. "Does she still cook for you?" she asked. "Every night." "Do you eat it?" "Every night," Harrison said. But there was a wall the investigation kept hitting, and it was the same wall every time. Nobody knew where Trevor Kane was. Without Trevor, there was no witness. Without a witness, the calls were just calls, and the money was just money, and the whole structure stayed theoretical. Twice, investigators thought they had a sighting, a man matching his description at a truck stop in Alabama, another at a bus station in Chattanooga. Both went nowhere. Nolan's theory shifted through November. He said it out loud in Harrison's kitchen on a cold evening while Rebecca was at a school function. He didn't run, Nolan said. Men who run use money. He hasn't touched $1 since October 21st. Not an ATM, not a card, not a Western Union. Nothing. Then what? Nolan looked at his coffee. Then somebody decided he was a problem, he said. Meanwhile, Rebecca appeared confident. More than confident. She was expansive. She hosted a dinner in November. She joined a second committee. She stood in the church vestibule in a gray coat and accepted sympathy from strangers with a small, brave nod. And she began, carefully, to build a story about her husband. She told a friend that Harrison had become paranoid since the accident. She said it kindly. That was what made it work. He's been through a lot, she said softly at a bake sale, holding a paper cup of cider. The doctors said the head injury can change things. Personality. Suspicion. He gets these ideas. What kind of ideas? Rebecca shook her head and looked away, as though loyalty stopped her from saying more. I think the accident changed him, she said. That's all. I just want my husband back. People believed her. That was what made her dangerous. Harrison understood it fully by then, and he still could not stop admiring it in a sick, distant way. She never looked guilty. Guilt has a posture, and she never once had it. She looked concerned. She looked like a woman standing beside a man who was falling apart, holding on out of love, and if Harrison had ever gone to a neighbor and said the truth out loud. My wife paid a man to kill me, and I think she killed him too. Every person in that town would have looked at Rebecca with pity and at Harrison with worry. She had built that. Over 11 years, one casserole at a time, she had built a room with no door in it. The only way out was evidence. The breakthrough came from a place nobody had been watching. In the second week of December, a forensic accountant working Trevor Kane's finances went back further than anyone had asked her to. She was not looking for a body. She was looking for a pattern. She found a series of transactions connected to Rebecca Vale. Not direct transfers. Rebecca was too careful for that. But there was a cash withdrawal in August and a cash deposit into Trevor's account 31 hours later for the same amount, minus $100. There was a prepaid card bought at a pharmacy in Clayton on a day Rebecca's own card recorded a purchase at a store in the same shopping center, 11 minutes apart. There were 4 of those. They lined up like fence posts. Then investigators put Trevor Kane's phone on a map. They had been mapping it against the highway. That was the case. But when they widened the window and stopped filtering, the same tower cluster kept appearing. The one that covered the northeast side of Bellwood, including a stretch of county road, including the gravel drive that ran up to the Vale house. Trevor Kane's phone had been within a few hundred yards of Harrison's home 11 times in the 6 weeks before the crash. And then, at 3:12 in the afternoon on Tuesday, October 21st, it had connected to that tower one last time and never connected to anything again. Finally, someone pulled Rebecca's purchase history for the 2 weeks after that date. Gardening supplies. Bark mulch. Bagged topsoil, 400 pounds of it. A landscape edging kit. A dogwood sapling from a nursery in Clayton. Lime, which a curious analyst looked up and then looked up again. Individually, none of it proved anything. Harrison understood that. People buy mulch. People buy prepaid cards. People drive past houses. But Nolan laid it all on the table in a conference room on the 14th of December, and Harrison stood over it and looked down at 8 months of his own life arranged in columns, and he could see it the way he could see a failing bearing on a shop floor. Together, it was a shape. It's enough for a warrant, Nolan said. It's not enough for a jury. Not yet. So what changes it? Nolan did not answer that. He did not have to. The warrant came through on a Thursday morning, 3 days before Christmas. Harrison was not there when they served it. He was 30 miles away at Mara's house, sitting at a kitchen table with a mug he was not drinking from, watching his nephew build something out of plastic blocks on the floor. He had been asked to be somewhere else. He had agreed without argument. Rebecca was on the porch when they arrived. She had heard the vehicles on the gravel, 4 of them, and she had come out with a dish towel still in her hand. That was what Nolan said later. She stood at the top of her own steps in the cold, in a cardigan, with a towel in her hand, and she watched 6 people get out of cars in her driveway. She did not run. She did not reach for a phone. She smiled. "What is this about?" she said. Nolan came up the walk and held out the papers. "Mrs. Vale, this is a warrant to search the residence and the grounds." She took it. She read it. She actually read it all the way through, and it took her almost a minute, and nobody in that driveway said a word while she did. Then she handed it back and stepped aside from her own door. "Of course," she said. She was completely calm. Nolan said afterward that in 26 years he had never seen anything like it. She offered to make coffee. She told them where the breaker panel was. When an officer asked whether there were animals on the property, she said no and apologized that she could not be more helpful. She looked innocent, not defiant, not offended, not frightened. Innocent, in a plain and unstudied way that would have convinced anyone. She stayed that way for 4 hours, right up until the officers reached the garden. The search went on all day. They started inside. They photographed every room. They took 2 laptops, a tablet, a shoebox of receipts from the top of the bedroom closet, and a spiral notebook from the kitchen drawer where Rebecca kept lists. Rebecca sat at her own kitchen table with her hands around a mug and watched them work. She answered every question briefly and pleasantly. When an officer knocked over a small ceramic bird on the hall shelf, she said not to worry about it. Outside, a second team walked the property. It was a cold, bright December day, the sky white and low. The grass was stiff with frost that never fully burned off. They walked the tree line first, then the shed, then the old fence at the back of the lot. Then they came to the garden. Most of it was dormant and level, the way a garden is in December. Dead stalks, flat beds, a wheelbarrow tipped up against the fence. But the corner was different. The soil there was darker and looser than everything around it. It sat slightly higher, the way ground does when it has been dug out and put back. There was fresh bark mulch over it, and a young dogwood staked at the edge with green tape, and the outline of a bed marked in new plastic edging. An officer put a probe in and drew it out and looked at it. Then he called for Nolan. Forensic investigators took over at 2 in the afternoon. They set up lights because the day was already going. They put up screens. A generator ran at the side of the house for the rest of the day and into the dark, and neighbors up and down the county road stood in their driveways and watched the glow behind the Vale house. Rebecca moved to the kitchen window. She stood there for hours with her arms folded, looking out at the lights and the shapes moving in the cold. Nobody made her stay in the house. She could have sat down. She could have called a lawyer. She stood at the window and watched. Her face never changed. An officer stationed in the hall said later that she did not speak once in the last 3 hours, and that when the generator noise shifted and the voices outside changed pitch, she did not flinch. At 6:40 p.m., one of the forensic investigators walked up out of the lights and crossed the yard to Nolan. He said 4 or 5 words. Nolan's expression changed. It was not shock. He had known for weeks, the way you know something you cannot yet say. It was heavier than shock. It was a man watching the last door close on a thing he had hoped, without much hope, might still turn out another way. He looked up at the kitchen window. Rebecca was standing in it, lit from behind by the range hood, perfectly still. She looked back at him. Harrison was not there. He had been asked to stay away from the property until the search was finished, and he had stayed away. He spent that day at his sister's house and did not accomplish a single thing in it. He watched the clock on the microwave. He walked to the window and back. Mara made lunch, and he ate 3 bites of it. At 7:15, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Nolan. He stood up before he answered, without knowing why, and walked into the front hall and put his back against the wall. Harrison. Nolan's voice was different. Flat. Careful. What happened? Harrison said. There was a silence on the line. Harrison could hear the generator running behind it, and a man's voice calling out a measurement to somebody. We found Trevor, Nolan said. Harrison went silent. He stood in his sister's hallway with a coat rack beside him and his nephew's shoes on the floor, and he did not say anything for 6 or 7 seconds. Where? He said. He heard Nolan take a breath. In your backyard. Harrison closed his eyes. Later he would try to describe what that moment was like, and he never managed it because there was no single feeling in it. There was the cold arithmetic clicking into place. Of course, the mulch, the lime, 3 weekends with her hair tied back. There was the memory of standing at the window with tea going cold in his hands, saying you're out there a lot. And there was this, which was the part that stayed. The man who had tried to kill him had been lying 40 feet from where Harrison slept, under a young dogwood tree, under bulbs that would have come up in April. For 2 months, Harrison had eaten dinner in a kitchen that looked out over him. "Harrison," Nolan said, "are you there?" Harrison opened his eyes. "Yeah," he said. "I'm here. We're taking her tonight." "Good. You don't need to come. There's nothing for you to see." "I know," Harrison said. He hung up and put the phone in his pocket and stood in the hallway a moment longer. Then he went back into the kitchen, where his sister was standing with her hand over her mouth, and he said the words out loud for the first time. "They found him," he said. "He was in the garden." Police arrested Rebecca Vale at 9:20 that night in the driveway of her own house. For the first time in 11 years, and probably for the first time in her life, the mask cracked. Harrison did not see it. He heard about it from Nolan, and later he read the transcripts, and later still he sat in a courtroom while a video was played on a screen mounted on the wall. She cried. Not the careful crying she had done in hospital hallways. This was ugly and loud, and it went on for a long time, and it did not stop when the recording started. She begged. She said she wanted to explain. She said everyone had it backwards. She said Trevor had threatened her. She said he had come to the house and put his hands on her and told her what he would do to her daughter if she went to the police. She said she had been afraid for months, so afraid that she had not been able to think straight. She said she had never wanted Harrison dead. She said it 4 separate times in the first hour. She said she had loved her husband every day of her life. Some of it might even have been true. Harrison thought about that a great deal in the following year and never settled it. Trevor probably had threatened her. He had probably been ugly about it in that kitchen. Fear was likely somewhere in the mix. But fear did not explain 22 months of calls. And it did not explain the prepaid cards or the appraisal ordered 9 months early or a 51-second phone call at 9:44 on a rainy Thursday night. Investigators had months of planning laid out in evidence. They had financial records showing money moving toward Trevor Kane in 4 careful increments. They had message threads in which 2 people discussed Harrison's schedule, his route home, the color and make of his truck, and the fact that the stretch past mile marker 41 had no cameras on it. They had insurance documents she had requested copies of in July. They had the vehicle, with Harrison's paint on the corner of it. They had Trevor's phone, sitting under a tower map that ended at her address. And they had the garden. Her attorney was a competent man from Nashville, and he did the only thing available to him. He argued that Rebecca had been manipulated. He built a picture of a lonely woman drawn in by a career criminal with 2 convictions, a man who used her, pressured her, and then used her again. For about 2 days, it almost worked. Then the prosecutors put the money on the screen. Because the trouble with the manipulated woman's story was simple. Trevor Kane could not have built any of it. He had failed at every scheme he had ever attempted. He had been caught for fraud twice by people who were not trying very hard. Rebecca had been the one running the financial plan. All of it. She had researched what happened to jointly held property and what happened to a retirement account when a spouse dies. She had ordered the appraisal. She had learned the payout terms on the policy. She had pulled a copy of the deed in March. She had researched Harrison's schedule for weeks, and she had known his route home because she had driven it herself twice at night to look at it. She knew what the insurance would pay. She knew what the house would sell for. She knew, to the day, when a lawyer named was scheduled to redirect part of her husband's inheritance to his sister. And through every single week of it, she had gone to church, run a bake sale, sat with the elderly, brought soup to a widow, and asked a man at a plant 15 miles outside town whether he had eaten anything besides the vending machine. She had built the image of a devoted wife with the same patience she used to build everything else, and she had used it as cover. In the end, her greatest weakness was the same thing that had made her dangerous. She believed she could control everyone. She believed a detective would take her at her word because everyone always had. She believed a husband would stay half asleep because he always had. She believed a man like Trevor Kane could be handled, promised, and postponed indefinitely. She had run that calculation on every person in her life for 11 years, and it had always come out right. It came out wrong 3 times in 3 months, and 3 was all it took. Months later, Harrison sat in court. It was July by then. The courthouse in Bellwood was an old brick building with a radiator system that had been fighting the air conditioning since 1974, and the room smelled like paper, and floor wax. Harrison sat in the second row on the left with his sister beside him, in the same gray suit he had worn to his father's funeral. His ribs had healed. His wrist ached when the weather turned. He had gotten used to both. The doors opened, and Rebecca came in. She wore jail clothing, because the sentencing came after the plea negotiations had collapsed and after 11 days of trial, and by then there was nothing left to dress up for. She looked smaller than he remembered. That surprised him. He had prepared himself for a lot of things. For anger, for the possibility that he might not be able to look at her at all. He had not prepared for the fact that she would look like an ordinary woman in her 40s who had not slept well. Her hair was pulled back plainly. There was no makeup. Her wrists looked thin coming out of the sleeves. She sat down and, before her attorney had finished arranging his papers, she turned and looked at Harrison. He gave her nothing. Not anger. Not tears. Not so much as a change in his breathing. He looked back at her the way you look at a road sign. She held it for a moment, and then face front. The proceeding took most of the morning. There were statements. There was a victim impact statement from Trevor Kane's mother, an old woman from Alabama who read 4 sentences off a piece of paper and could not finish the 5th. Harrison listened to all of it with his hands flat on his knees. Her attorney argued for leniency. He talked about her daughter. He talked about a woman with no criminal history, a lifetime of community service, a church that had written letters. Then the judge asked whether the defendant wished to speak. Rebecca stood. She did not look at the judge. She turned in place at the defense table, and she spoke directly to Harrison. "I loved you," she said. The room went very quiet. Harrison sat there for a few seconds. He could feel Mara's hand tighten on his arm, a warning, a please don't. Then he stood up. The judge did not stop him. Harrison had been recognized to give a statement and had waived it in writing that morning. He walked to the rail, put one hand on it, and looked across 10 feet of courtroom at the woman he had married in a church 3 miles from that building. "No," he said. Rebecca's face tightened. "You don't get to say that," Harrison said. "Not in here. Not to me. Harrison, I was your husband." His voice did not rise. It never rose, not once, and afterward that was what people in the gallery remembered. "You were supposed to be my family." Rebecca started to cry. It came fast, and it looked real. "I made mistakes," she said. Harrison shook his head slowly. "You made plans." Nobody moved. The court reporter's hand stopped for half a second, and then went on. "You planned for my death," Harrison said. "You planned how to take my money. You planned how to get my house. You planned how to collect my insurance. You sat at my kitchen table and figured out what my life was worth on paper, and then you went upstairs and slept next to me." He paused. He let it stand in the room. "You called him at 9:44 that night," he said. "I called you at 9:40 to say I loved you and I was coming home. 4 minutes. That's what it took." Rebecca's mouth opened. "And when the man helping you became a problem," Harrison said, "you made him disappear. Then you planted flowers on him and told the neighbors you were making the place beautiful again." Somewhere behind him, a woman in the gallery made a small sound. "His mother sat in that chair this morning," Harrison said. She couldn't finish her sentence. "You should have listened harder." Rebecca looked down. For once, she had nothing to say. No smile arriving half a second late. No warm, easy answer. She stood in front of 200 people with her hands cuffed at the waist, and there was nothing on her face at all. Harrison stood there a moment longer. Then he turned around and walked back to his seat and sat down, and he did not look at her again for the rest of the day. Rebecca was convicted for her role in the conspiracy surrounding the attempted killing of her husband, for the financial crimes built around it, and for the death and concealment of Trevor Kane. The judge read the sentence in a level voice that took less than 2 minutes. It was a long one, long enough that the arithmetic was simple. She would be an old woman before any part of the outside world was available to her again, if it ever was. Rebecca did not react. She sat with her back straight and her chin level, the way she had sat in 1,000 meetings, and when the officers came to take her out, she stood up without being asked. She did not look at Harrison on the way past. The house sold that autumn. Harrison did not go back to it after the search, except once, for an afternoon, with 2 men and a rented trailer. He took his tools. He took his father's watch out of a drawer. He took the box of his daughter's school things. The rest he left, and the estate sale people handled it. The garden had been dug out entirely by then, the corner bed gone down to raw clay, and he stood at the back door for perhaps a minute looking at the hole in the ground and feeling almost nothing about it. Then he shut the door and turned the key and dropped it through the realtor's slot on the way out of town. He used part of his recovered assets to rebuild. He bought a small place on the north side of Clayton, 1 story, no stairs, with a gravel drive and a shop out back where he could work. He kept his job at the plant. The men there did not ask him about any of it, which was the greatest kindness they could have offered, and he knew it. He sent Mara the money. He did it in the first week, before the house even sold, before anyone advised him to wait. I drew up the papers, and Harrison signed them at a desk with a bad pen and felt, for the first time in a year, that something had gone the way he intended. His nephew had the second surgery in March. It went well. Harrison did not keep the garden. He did not keep the truck. It had been totaled anyway, but he could have taken the settlement and bought the same model again, and he did not. He bought something different, a different color, with a different engine note. He did not keep the wedding photographs. He did not burn them either, because burning them would have meant they still had power. He put them in a box, and the box went to the estate sale with everything else, and he never once wondered who bought it. He did not need any of it. One spring morning, more than a year after a wet Thursday night on the highway, Harrison stood beside the lake outside town. It was early. Mist sat on the water in low sheets and lifted as the sun came over the ridge. A pair of ducks worked the shallows near the boat ramp. The air smelled like cold water and pine sap, and the mud at the edge of the bank. Nolan stood a few feet away with his hands in his coat pockets. He had retired in February. He looked better for it, and worse at standing still. "You ever think about that night?" Nolan asked. Harrison looked at the water. "Every day." "The hospital? The 1147? Harrison nodded. "I thought you were coming to tell me I was going to die," he said. "That's what I thought when you put your hand over my mouth. I thought the scan came back bad, and they'd sent a cop for some reason my brain couldn't work out." Nolan smiled faintly. "Instead, I told you somebody wanted you dead." "Yeah, sorry about the hand, by the way." "Don't be," Harrison said. "It was the right call." "I almost lost everything," Harrison said. Nolan looked sideways at him. "But you didn't." Harrison shook his head. No. He had lost plenty. He was honest with himself about that. He had lost a wife, which was not the same as losing a marriage, because the marriage turned out never to have existed in the form he thought it had. He had lost 11 years he could not get back, and would not have wanted back. He had lost the house where he had believed he was safe, and he had lost the ability to walk into any room and assume the people in it were what they appeared to be. But he had kept something Rebecca never expected him to have, the truth. And he had kept it because on the 7th night in that hospital, with his ribs broken and his head still swimming, he had made a choice. He had not shouted. He had not thrown her out. He had not driven home and put his fist through a wall, or gone to a neighbor, or written her a letter he would regret. He had stayed calm. He had smiled at her and drunk the coffee and said thank you every day for 2 months, while investigators quietly took her apart from the outside in. And because of that, her own carefully constructed story had been allowed to collapse under its own weight. Rebecca had spent 11 years making an entire town believe she was the perfect wife. In the end, that image was the very thing that trapped her. Because when investigators finally opened her life, they did not just find evidence of what she had done. They found evidence of how carefully she had hidden it. The appraisal ordered too early. The prepaid cards bought 11 minutes apart. The soil brought in months before it was needed. The lime. The flowers. Every step she had taken to look innocent became a step a prosecutor could point at and say, "This took planning." An impulsive woman might have been believed. A careful one could not be. Harrison looked at the quiet lake one last time. He did not forgive her. He never planned to. People had suggested it to him, gently, in the way people do. The pastor, a counselor of the plant, sent him to a well-meaning cousin at a wedding. They told him forgiveness was for him, not for her. Harrison listened politely to every one of them and went home unchanged. But standing at the water that morning, he finally understood something he had been circling for a year. Rebecca had spent months planning how to end his life. She had accounted for the rain, the route, the timing, the truck, the insurance, the lawyer's appointment, the grieving widow face she would wear at the funeral. She had planned for everything. She had never once planned for him to survive. And that was her biggest mistake. At 11:47 p.m., in a dim hospital room, with a stranger's hand over his mouth, Harrison Vale learned that somebody wanted him dead. 2 months later, the rest of the truth came up out of his own garden. And the woman who wanted everything he owned ended up losing every single thing she had. The house, the money, the town that loved her, the daughter who would not visit, the name she had spent her whole life building, including her freedom. Harrison turned away from the lake and walked back to his truck, and the mist closed over the water behind him, and he did not look back.